From RFN Studios, this is Radio Free Norfolk. The following interview with former military chaplain Gord Moir is something very special. His role and the role of all Padres before him to support the emotional well-being and faith needs of soldiers and their families in the hardest of times is part of a softer side of the military we don't always get to see. But it is an important part of the larger machine. Gord told us how he got into this line of work and the training he received.
My name's Gord Moir. I, for 17 years, served as the chaplain to the Royal Highland Fusiliers of Canada, based out of Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge, 1995 until 2012. I was a captain and basically started that work. I was invited by one of my fellow Anglican clergy, who was a military chaplain, asked me if I would be interested in this line of work, and I thought that it would be a great way of honoring our military history and serving the people in my local community. So that's the road that I decided to go down. Any chaplain coming into the Canadian military, at least from a Christian background, of course we have chaplains from different faith traditions, but from a Christian perspective, when I came in, I'm not sure if it's still the same way, but the minimum was that you had 5 years of parish experience. And so, the training was your theological background, your theological education plus a minimum of 5 years of parish experience. And then you would come in and do military training, and there were courses on how to be a chaplain, military protocols, all that kind of thing, as well as courses on, all kinds of topics, from ethics to military history, that kind of thing, as well as field training. And then while you were doing that, you would be parading with your unit on a regular basis. So you would spend time with the soldiers, get to know them, go on field exercises with them, that kind of thing.
Gord spoke about the sacrifice of military members and other military chaplains who have inspired him.
When I joined the Army and was privileged to be associated with at that time, the Highland Fusiliers of Canada, we received our royal designation about 8 or 9 years after I started. One of the chaplains, Jock Anderson, had been the chaplain for the local reserve units during the Second World War. One of the things that's quite remarkable about the chaplaincy is that on a per capita basis, it's the most highly decorated of all the branches in the Canadian military. Jock Anderson had won the military medal not once but twice, and the military medal is the second highest honor that the Canadian Army extends to soldiers for bravery in battle. He won that twice. It's next to the Victoria Cross, and in order to win the Victoria Cross, you pretty much have to die. Not exclusively, but it's almost always awarded posthumously. John Foote, chaplain from Hamilton, received the Victoria Cross for his work at Dieppe. Jock Anderson, who I got to know personally, he was a real hero. At Buron, which was the bloodiest battle of the Second World War for our local unit, went around from soldier to soldier who had been shot and injured, ministering to them in the middle of an open field as they were under fire, as they were attacking the French village of Buron, trying to drive the German troops out. Incredible bravery, and just an absolutely wonderful man. He was such an awesome role model. When I think of Second World War, that's where my mind goes. Of course, many of the fellows that used to hang around with the unit were veterans of the Second World War, and I would hear their stories, and had great, just a tremendous level of respect for all of them and their comrades who had fallen. So it was certainly part of that.
Being a Christian chaplain, I asked Gord how he supported people who didn't share his faith.
Right. I'm glad you asked that question. Part of the training that we received was, regardless of the faith background that we came from, to be able to offer compassion and empathy and support to people of any faith tradition or of no faith tradition. And so, as a military chaplain, as a Padre in the Canadian Forces, you're called upon to offer support to people of different religions, people who have no religious affiliation, and was always happy to do that, just based on that you're there to support a fellow human being who is a fellow Canadian who's dedicating his or her life to the same cause that the rest of the Army is all about. So it was always an absolute profound privilege to work with whoever I was working with.
I asked about his role in preparing soldiers for deployment and screening.
Yeah, the objective here was the chaplain was seen as part of a team that would do pre-deployment screenings, and we were looking for anything that might prevent a soldier from completing his mission in, say, for example, Afghanistan. The military doesn't want to send a soldier into a war theater and then have to pull that soldier out because of a family situation or something that was predictable, because once they get over there, of course, the other soldiers in the unit come to rely upon each other. And when you start taking people out, it weakens the overall unit. If you've got someone that's doing a particular task and you take that person out, well, now there's nobody to do that task, and now you've got to find a replacement, that kind of thing. So we would be screening for anything that would pose a potential red flag of a person not being able to complete their 6-month tour. So things like any kind of a potential family situation. Did they have family members who had been recently diagnosed with a terminal illness, for example, so that they would get over there, and then, not only would it be possible that they'd have to be pulled back to Canada for a funeral of a parent or something like that, but that they also might be, their mind would be preoccupied with what was going on back home and not fully engaged in what they were doing there. Because when you're in a war theater, you've really got to have your wits about you. You've got to be able to concentrate on what you're doing and not be too concerned about things back home. So things like, for a male soldier, is your wife pregnant? What, is there any health concerns with your parents? Is there anything going on in your family that in your life that could prevent you from being able to stay? For soldiers who were doing repeat tours, were they suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? It just basically was everybody that was going fit in terms of their physicality, in terms of their what was going on for them emotionally, psychologically, try to prevent situations where people had to be pulled back out.
I wondered if he noticed any difference in screening or support needs of female soldiers.
No, I don't think that there was really any fundamental difference. A soldier is a soldier is a soldier, and each person has a unique situation. And sometimes, because they were female, they might have had some specific things that would be happening with them that might not have been happening with male soldiers. But in terms of things like whether they were deployable or not, the screening process would be very similar.
As Captain Peter Davis and Christian Lillington emphasized, the burden of service is shared by the families of military members, and Gord feels privileged to have been able to offer support to these families.
I also think of the families, the sacrifices that the families make, and not just in terms of, those who don't come back from missions, but, typically a mission. When a soldier goes off on a mission, it's usually 3 to 4 months of intense training that takes them away from home, and then 6 months in theater. So, huge family issues, families having to find ways of coping without their loved one, the support of that person being around, worried about them all the time. And so I often think of that. And of course, when it comes to, what does Remembrance Day mean to me, I have very vivid memories of visiting families with injury and death notifications during the Afghanistan war, and actually at other times. and just how difficult, incredibly difficult that is for the families, and the sacrifices that are made. The last thing that you want to see is when your soldier is in Afghanistan. The last thing you want to see is a Padre and a commanding officer walking down your driveway together, because it's not going to be good news. And the memories that I have of that are indelibly etched in my mind, never to be forgotten. The visits with the families, doing the notifications, being a part of the repatriation ceremonies, incredibly powerful, very emotionally moving experiences. Going down to Trenton with the families to receive the bodies coming back from Afghanistan, and then riding in the procession of cars on the Highway of Heroes, and seeing people pulled over to the side of the road, standing beside their cars, saluting as the entourage goes by. The fire trucks parked on top of the overpasses on the 401, and hundreds and hundreds of people lining the bridges, waving Canadian flags, all paying their respects to the fallen soldiers. Absolutely incredibly moving experience. It was just phenomenal to see that kind of support, and to be able to, in some small way, offer some condolence and some support to those families was a huge privilege.
Gord is a man with so much empathy. It made me wonder how he coped with having to be strong for those who leaned on him through such tragedy.
Well, I remember going out to a farmhouse in the middle of the night, sort of somewhere between Stratford and Kitchener, and giving the sad news to a family that their son had been killed in action in Afghanistan. I remember going down to Trenton on 4 different occasions to welcome deceased soldiers back to Canada as the C-130s flew in with the caskets. And I remember one time there were 4 soldiers had been killed in one incident. And so there were 4 caskets coming back, and just a huge sense of solemnity and sadness around that. The presence of being with people who have just found out that their son had been killed in action. The words just fail to try to describe the absolute profound sense of loss that brings to families, and the anguish. I remember one incident when myself and a commanding officer were doing an injury notification, and it was around 5 o'clock in the morning as we knocked on this door. And the mother of the soldier looked out the window and saw us and just started screaming. And I remember saying, loudly through the door, "He's not dead. He's not dead." And seeing the incredible look of relief on her face when she found out that, that all that had happened was that he had lost his leg. It's just remarkable. Those kinds of memories have been really etched in my mind, never to be forgotten. It's really important to have a good support network. I was always support of the other members of the chaplain's branch. Whenever I did one of those kinds of notifications, there would be support from other chaplains. They would call and, say, ask me how I was doing, that kind of thing. So I had a chance to talk about it, to debrief, which is a huge part of dealing with trauma. And, having other soldiers in my own unit were supportive and, knew what was going on. And, when I was called upon to do those kinds of services, the support of family, friends, we're here to look after each other and take care of each other. That's the kind of support that I found for myself. That was absolutely invaluable. The support of my parish was important. It was a group effort to, try and deal with the grief and the trauma of it.
He told me about the camaraderie of the military family and how he sees parallels between that and how people have come together to fight COVID-19.
It really impresses upon me how much the military is like a family. People often talk about, the military family, and it really is a good analogy. We've got people who care about each other, who support each other through thick and thin, who can put aside their differences, come together in a time of crisis to be as supportive as they possibly can for each other. And that goes across branches, Air Force, Navy, Army, whatever it may be. People come together to support each other. I don't know, maybe it's a particular lens that I see the world through, but I see the struggle that we've got right now with COVID as being kind of the same thing. We're engaged in a worldwide conflict against the COVID-19, against this virus, just sort of randomly and indiscriminately, killing Canadians, killing people all over the world. And, I see people putting aside their differences, come together to try and be as supportive of each other as we can to somehow get through this and to be there for each other. I kind of see, putting on a mask to go out into the city today is kind of like putting on the uniform, that we're engaged in this battle and that we're all in it together. And hopefully, calls us to be a little more considerate of each other, to be mindful that maybe that person who's, driving the car sitting beside you at the stoplight makes you kind of wonder what they might be going through in their life right now. Is their mother or their father sick? What are people struggling with? What's going on for their kid? How are they coping with not being able to go to school? All that kind of stuff. Hopefully helps us to be a little more compassionate, a little more empathetic and understanding of each other. And that's what I kind of saw the military family does as well. We realize that we're going through a tough time here, but we'll pull together, we'll get through it with the good leadership that the Army's able to provide and the good training and all of that kind of thing, that we we'll get through this.
Many children are separated from a parent because of deployment. And I was curious about Gord's thoughts on how children are supported through something they may not understand completely and their role in healing as a family.
I interacted with the children at a very cursory level, not to do any kind of serious intervention, but rather to make referrals. That wasn't within my area, but certainly to, get to know them, to be able to carry on a conversation with them, that kind of thing, ask them, how things are going in their lives, but not to do any kind of serious intervention. Children are incredibly resilient. Often it's the children that help bring the soldier back from psychological injuries. The soldier decides that he's got to get better for the sake of his kids. And so, the children often play a very positive and a huge role in their military member coming back.
We discuss the challenges of trying to predict how a soldier may respond to the trauma they may experience during deployment, and the challenge the military faces trying to give adequate mental health supports before and after deployment.
Once again, that's a very individual kind of thing. Some soldiers come back perfectly physically whole, do fine. In fact, I would say that's probably in the majority. Soldiers come back and they carry on with their lives and, move on and are negatively impacted significantly in any way, shape, or form. Some people who are physically injured, maybe lose a limb, lose their sight. They just take that in stride, obviously have, some kind of physical handicap, but, move ahead with their lives and do okay. Other people come back with psychological injuries and struggle. They may look perfectly fine physically, go for a physical exam and pass with flying colors, but psychologically, they struggle. And once again, I think that's one of the things that the military is getting better at. I think in the past, we did a terrible job of trying to address any of the psychological injuries. And that's one one of the big areas of growth for us, and that we're starting to do a much better job at trying to assist soldiers who have the psychological injuries. But it really is based on the individual. When it comes to trauma, it's not so much what happened, it's how that impacted the person. That's one of the things that we know about trauma. What may be completely insignificant to one person is a huge issue for somebody else. It really depends on the makeup of that person and what's going on in their life at that particular moment, whether they're going to be traumatized by an incident or not. You can have, six soldiers were blown up in an IED incident. There was an IED went off, and 5 of them walk away from it perfectly fine, and one of them is devastated. It really depends on how that incident impacts that person at that particular moment in time. I think that there are certain things that come into play. If a person is a highly anxious person, if they've perhaps had other cases of trauma in their lives, that they can be re-triggered. Those are fairly obvious. It puts a person at risk if there's a lot of potentially traumatizing stuff going on in their life at that particular moment. Things like family members that are sick. But even then, it's just trying to predict who's going to be traumatized is incredibly, it's almost impossible. When you look at firefighters, you might have a firefighter who's been a first responder for years and years and years, and then, there's one particular incident and that person's traumatized by it. Trauma is very unpredictable. Let's just put it that way. I think it's just very unpredictable.
Do you agree with that, the military is doing the best they can, but there's always going to be people who fall through the cracks because it is such an individual experience and it requires people to reach out for help?
Oh, absolutely. We're all on a huge learning curve, whether we're talking the military or the culture, wider. From a wider perspective. When I look at how we handled post-traumatic stress back in the First World War and the Second World War, we've learned so much. We do it a whole lot better than what we ever used to do. One of the things that we were learning through the Afghanistan war was, just the extent of post-traumatic stress that our soldiers were coming back with. And we were developing programs as we went along. And I'm sure that continues to this day, that we're learning more and more about the psychology of soldiers and warfare and all of that kind of thing. And that as we learn more, we put it into practice and we test that out. And it's kind of like with COVID. We know so much more now than we did, back at the end of February. And, hopefully we're managing it better, wearing masks and testing and all that kind of thing. So I think that kind of same analogy certainly applies to psychological injuries from warfare. I think we're getting better at it. Have we absolutely arrived? No way. We're still learning. We're getting better. And hopefully, we'll continue to improve. Are we doing enough? I don't know that there's ever a absolute positive answer to that. I think there's always more that we can do, but I think that we're really, the Canadian military takes these psychological injuries very seriously and is doing all that it can to use the best knowledge that we have in the world today to try to advance the recovery of soldiers who have psychological injuries.
Taking human lives is something that is expected as a possibility when you join the armed forces. But an individual soldier's reaction may not be even what they had anticipated. I wondered how Gord helped soldiers work through that.
I've certainly worked with soldiers who have taken other people's lives. Clearly, that's a moral issue, but that's within the realm to be expected when you go into a war zone. And so to help them process that is very difficult. And once again, it becomes a very individual thing. For some soldiers, that's just part of the job. I have yet to encounter anybody who liked that part of the job, but they just saw that as part of what they were there for, part of what the mission was about. For those who were struggling with it, once again, from a Christian perspective, that's where God's forgiveness comes in. But, also recognizing that they were working for a greater cause of trying to get rid of evil in the world and promote goodness and support for downtrodden people who needed the support. So, and that's where it's so important that as a country, we're going to be involved in wars, that we make sure that the war is morally justified, because that plays a huge role in the psychological health of the soldiers themselves.
Not only is Gord empathetic and caring, he is also very modest. He told me how at times he felt intimidated by the heavy nature of his work.
In going to do injury and death notifications, when you're sitting at the far end of the driveway about to make that walk up the driveway to knock on the door, for me personally, there was just this incredible sense of inadequacy. Sort of what do I have to bring to this situation? And just how much I relied upon God to use me to try to bring some comfort to a situation that was just untenable. It is the most daunting thought that you're going to walk up that driveway and bring news to this family that is going to alter them forever. And profound sense of inadequacy and humbleness and respect for them and all that their loved ones stood for and paid the ultimate sacrifice for. What I have to offer them is so little compared to what they need. Just realizing that it's going to take a lot of people to, support them, to help get them through it, and realizing that you're part of a machine, you're an important part of a machine, but all the parts of the machine are important, and that it's going to take everybody to be able to offer the support that this family is going to need.
The following few segments are words of comfort and advice Gord has for different parts of the military family, for those with a loved one deployed now or in the future.
What words of comfort would I give? Well, that would sort of depend upon what their background is. If they're coming from a faith perspective, I would be talking to them about putting their trust in God. And for anybody, I would be talking about kind of support that the military has for each other, that we're there for each other, that the training is good, that we've got people in positions of command that have a heart for the soldiers, that they care about them, that they're not going to be reckless. And also to say to them that their loved one who's deployed is doing incredibly honorable work. They're trying to make life better for people, promote the cause of freedom, and that's an incredibly honorable thing to be doing.
For the military member getting ready to come home, trying to adjust to repatriation.
But, to point out to them that what they're coming back to is not necessarily what they left. It's been 6 to 9 months since they basically left their family, and that things have evolved while they've been away. To be sensitive to that, move slowly to find out, where their family is at this point in time, and to try to fit back in as best that they can. Once again, I would really stress the moving slowly, taking time to get reacquainted, to figure out routines. While Dad's been away in Afghanistan, that Mom and the kids have developed a kind of new routine. For him coming back, if it's a case of a male soldier, for him coming back, that's going to change the dynamic of what they've become used to. And so to just take it slowly and to be kind to themselves, to be kind to their families, and to hang in there, move ahead as best they can. And to, look for support from the wider community, from the support the military is able to give through social work, through the military family resource centers, the chaplains branch, members of their unit, all that kind of thing. Look to the support systems that are there, because, those things have been put in place so that our soldiers have the best chance of coming back and being able to move ahead successfully and happily.
For the military member who made it home but is struggling with PTSD.
Just to recognize that their disorder, the post-traumatic stress disorder, is caused by exceptional circumstances, is caused by trauma, to encourage them to hang in there, that there's, good resources to cope with it, to try to make sense of nonsense, and that there are all kinds of things in our lives that we can control. Obviously, there are things that we can't control. I choose to try to focus on the things that I do have some control over, and to turn to other people for support, that there's literally thousands of people out there who have good, caring, loving hearts that are full of kindness and support, and that, certainly if they're soldiers, and I'm sure this goes way beyond just being soldiers, but that there are people who care and that they matter, that their sacrifice is worthwhile and recognized and upheld and honored.
For the loved ones of a military member who's struggling with PTSD.
It's kind of comparable to Al-Anon. It's kind of comparable to the drug addict who won't get help. Once again, I would encourage that person to turn to other family members, to the community for support. Find a counselor at your local family counseling center. Make connections. Talk to the Padre of the unit. Talk to the people in the Family Military Resource Center. There's lots of good, caring people out there who have some understanding of what you're going through. There are other people going through it. Find those people, try to pull together, support each other. You'll have something to offer them. They'll have something to offer to you. It's together that we can pull through these things. When we stand by ourselves, my God, it can seem so lonely and so hopeless at times. Find some loving, caring people who can hold your hand and walk with you so that you don't feel so isolated and so alone.
Thank you, Gord, for all of the kind words and advice you have given people over the years. So often it helps just having someone to listen, and it's through our struggles that we realize how much one kind heart can make such a difference. And often that kindness has a ripple effect. No matter how harsh and ugly the world can seem, we must remember we are all in this together.